We will be having 2 sessions today and tomorrow afternoon where we'll get to hear a bit from the speakers of the conference. So let's start with a few introductions, brothers. Let's start over there. Say your name and where you're from, which church you're part of, and what talk you are giving.
My name is Mike Christ, and I live in Nairobi. Originally from the U.S., but have lived here for a couple of years, and I am thankful to be part of Emmanuel Baptist Church. Yeah.
Good.
Oh, and I gave a talk last night on gender.
Good. And you're also giving some talks?
And I'm doing some breakout sessions on union with Christ.
Good. Thank you, Mike.
Chopo Mwanza from Kitwe, Zambia. I pastor Faith Baptist Church, and I will be speaking on the immutability of God tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Oh, and I also serve at Central Africa Baptist University.
Ken Bugwa, I serve as one of the pastors here at Emmanuel Baptist Church.
Good, and the talk?
And I did my talk on Aseity earlier on.
That's a few years ago. My name is Joshua Lemine. I serve as one of the pastors here. I'll also be preaching on the Beatitude of God. All right, so Mike, thank you so much again for the lecture yesterday. Ken, so I got to ask you a few questions yesterday, and people got to ask you a few questions. Pastor Ken, you were seated there. Any particular thing that stood out for you from Ken's talk, particularly for anyone who was not there yesterday?
If you were not there for yesterday's session on gender, let me see your hand up. If you were not there yesterday evening for the pre-workshop, a lot of us. Good. So it's available online?
Yes, it is.
It will be, I guess, eventually?
It is already.
It's already available online. I would highly encourage you to go and listen to that. I was very, very encouraged by the biblical theology work from Genesis to the end, but especially in the way it allowed me to see Christ beautifully put on display. Just as I walked in, I was just a tad late. Our brother was explaining the similarity between Adam and Christ, and both how Adam received a bride and how Christ has received a bride, how God put Adam to sleep and in many ways wounded him. And out of that, a bride was created, and how similar that is to Christ and what he did. Even the slight application of that, namely this model of men, or specifically husbands, living sacrificially for the good of their wives, not being a thing that comes out of the fall, but something that even preceded the fall, was exceedingly encouraging. Overall, the elevation of gender as a whole, but of the woman specifically, was easily the highlight of highlights. I think we talk about complementarianism as something that we hold to and something that we value, and none of us who are complementarians hold it in such a way that we're trying to make any one particular gender feel less about themselves. And man, that talk just helps us see what God is doing through the woman. And I think if anybody was here, we walked out with new eyes. That's kind of how I was describing it. New eyes on gender generally, but new eyes specifically on the woman. And specifically that trajectory of how things are headed in a female direction. The church itself is called a bride. The Bible comes to an end with John being told to come and behold, right? Behold a bride that is coming down from the heavens. And I do pray any woman that was here, that they walked away with just a greater understanding and even sense of worth, having been made as a woman because of the talk. So that was very, very useful.
Yeah, really appreciated it as well. It is available on the EBC Nairobi YouTube channel. So if you search on YouTube EBC Nairobi, you should find the video Gender and the Gospel, both the talk and the Q&A that followed after from questions in the audience. So Mike, what are some books that you would recommend that you found helpful as you were preparing for the talk?
Yeah, well, the problem with that too is so few resources are here, which is why it's great that Ecclesia is doing what they're doing. And it'll be a while, but so recommending books is somewhat hard because of just the accessibility. I found, I'll mention two people I found helpful, and they do have things online, actually. They're both writing books, but they're not finished yet. So the people I've learned the most from in this regard is a professor named Mark Garcia. He's at Westminster, and a professor named Alistair Roberts, who teaches in various venues. And both of them have thought deeply about gender, and I was really standing on their shoulders in a lot of ways. I think Alistair Roberts has a kind of pamphlet that's available online about gender. And he's also got an article that's on the 9 Marks website about gender as well. That's, I think, a section from that other pamphlet. So, I would look those names up and you will be able to find some things. I mean, it's a difficult issue. I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything they say, almost because this is hard. And some of the questions last night were about, okay, how far can you go in this? Is this, and some people are going to draw the line differently, and I would draw the line differently than they do in some areas. But nevertheless, overall, in terms of the way of thinking, I find them helpful, and I would commend them.
Yeah. Before I have Chopo react to your message, what is the most exciting part of the preparation? What was the hardest part of preparing that message on the aseity of God?
Yeah, all of it felt hard. From the beginning to the end. I myself might have come across the frame or the term aseity maybe 18 months ago. It was helpful as I studied out the term to find out that it's related to terms that we're more familiar with. But starting off with a topic that felt so foreign was all difficult, but was grateful for friends along that journey. The usefulness, or the thing I enjoyed the most about it was the more I read, just how big God is, and that's just always good to bask in. My littleness, my puniness, in the presence of God in His largeness, especially in that particular doctrine, was very useful. So I don't typically do that level of deep reading. And I was just talking to a friend saying,
you do deep reading. Just members of Emmanuel Baptist Church, he does deep reading for someone. But for this one, you're saying for this one there was an especially.
I read thinner books normally, is what I should say. And by the time I was done with it, it was just so rewarding. I'm like, I should just be doing this a whole lot more in the evenings. It's just way better use of my time. So, that was maybe the highlight of just mining deep and getting something that is so good for my soul.
Thanks, brother. You served us really well. I was talking to him after the talk, saying just you've taken big rocks and really put them beneath us. There are ways in which we don't just think about a certain topic, but it's the way we should think about reality, since this is who God is. Any thoughts on the talk? Any
I wanted to ask.
Okay, go ahead.
Question to Mike.
Let's do that
first. And maybe it was just me. It struck me that it came across like you emphasized the beauty and the glory of the woman, and kind of moved on quickly on the role of the man. So he's the initiator and the majority. So was that intentional, or was it just me
feeling forgotten? Feeling forgotten.
Yeah, actually, I was driving home and thinking of all the things I would have done differently. And I do think that I unintentionally diminished that a bit, in that the biblical masculinity, God creating men, that is a wonderful thing. In some ways, I feel like there's a bit of that already there. But what I really probably could have done a bit better is set that on a better biblical foundation. And wanted to also really see, if you end up with a picture of, okay, we appreciate the glory of the woman, that's great, but we need to see the connection between them. And that in that sense, yes, the man is initiator, and it is in him doing that the glory of the woman is going to be put on display, because that's the way it works with Christ in the church too, right? Christ is it's because of his work that the glory of the church is there. And yes, so if we try to think then of the glory of the woman apart from also the man doing what he is needing to do, then we have sort of abstracted, taken that by itself. So, yeah, and it was also an issue of time, sort of cutting some things out there. So, but yeah, good. And the complexity of the woman's role was, I think, interesting, and I wanted to get at that.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good. Back to the question.
So kind of a general. I didn't stay in the whole time.
Moving on.
So I guess one of the questions with each of the sessions will be, we're going to kind of see a big God, and the question is, okay, so then it's one thing to be amazed and in awe, and you can kind of, how do you then relate and love and appreciate and worship, not in a kind of, he's transcendent, he's there, kind of the African ATR, big God out there. How do we daily relate with him in light of his bigness and uniqueness?
Yeah. Pastor Ken, walk us through some of the thinking behind some of the books that will be given away today. You talked about Matthew Barrett and how we are to view those books and how helpful they could be in helping us think in the ways that we're being encouraged through this weekend.
Yeah, so some of the help I got was from reading Bavinck, God and Creation. But Matthew Barrett's None Greater and his other book, The Simplicity of God, in many ways are simply digesting what Bavinck has said and going all the way back to Augustine for people like you and myself, so that you're able to read and revel in rich truths about God, as has been articulated so well by theologians of old like Bavinck, but written to us in modern ways. So those three would be really helpful.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So read them. This will be the main application here. And there's some good books as well, just going around on the tables for our vendors. The Scott Swain's the Trinity, an introduction. It's also a helpful resource. I've seen it on at least one of the tables. Any thoughts? Any questions for Pastor Ken concerning his talk on the aseity? Yeah.
Well, let me say that. There is something almost freakish about being able to hear the word aseity 18 months ago and do a message like that. And probably pastors should realize that that's not necessarily, you don't have to be able to pull that off to be a faithful pastor. So thank you. That was very good. You read very deeply for that. And I appreciated your drawing on Thomas Aquinas, very helpful, very strictly accurate, and that was good. But let me, what Chopa was saying before, with God as ase, as that's a clear demarcation of how he's different than us. Comment on that. What does that also speak to God's immanence, God's closeness? Like how do we relate that? Then as we say, he is not far from us, in Acts there. Yeah, so what is the connection there, and how can we then appropriate that? Like what is God's aseity? How does that make a difference for prayer and the Christian life in that way?
Yeah, so stuff that would be useful to think about more. That portion in John that speaks about Christ himself in the same language. So everything we're seeing in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1 is the exact same thing that you're seeing in John chapter 1 and verse 1. But it is speaking about that ase God as the same God who is now the incarnated God, as the God who has life in himself. But then that life is the light of men. So that it's not just merely distance away from him, but in him being who he is, he has come and invited us into a relationship with him through his son Jesus Christ. So that the doctrine is beautiful, because it not only shows just how high he is, But once you come and see the doctrine of the incarnation, you see that it is that same God, in no lesser way God. So not just truly man, but also truly God, who has come and is inviting us into a relationship with him. So he does not reduce his aseity in any way in his reaching out to us in his humanity. Yeah. So I think there's a lot there that's just, makes him imminent without reducing in any way his transcendence.
Yeah, man. Good, helpful.
Yeah, one last question and then 1 minute answer to you. As a pastor of a church, Chopper as well, lead pastor of a church, you preach a lot of Sundays. There's rhythms that are already built in, the administrative load and so on. What would be your counsel to a fellow pastor here who wants to apportion time to such study? Any wisdom they should have, any selectivity that they should apply in what they read, any counsel for them as they seek to, as they look at what you just talked about and what is written about in God's Word, and say, I'd like to drill deeper into that. Any counsel for such a pastor in the midst of administrative and many other kinds of decisions and workloads on their plate? Yeah.
So scheduling. You won't get time to read if you don't plan to read. So it actually showing up on your schedule, but job not done. Identifying systematically what you're trying to read. So picking that book which you want to start getting read and determining I'm going to read that book at this particular block of time. But then beyond that, I would say approaching that, not so much in like long blocks, like 2-hour block of reading Bavinck. I assure you, you'll be lost after 7 minutes and despair of life and just, watch Netflix next time with that particular block. But just doing it in focus blocks, like time blocks that are smaller. So if you take up that book, just determining, the next 20 minutes I want to be reading. And 20 minutes you can do, especially when you know you're about to take a break in 20 minutes. So if you have a 2-hour block set aside for reading, going in and saying no phone, no email, no distractions, just for 20 minutes. And you've pushed through a couple of chapters, then you can take a distraction for 5 minutes, and then you get back in again and scoop another 20 minutes. And if you do that habitually, you're going to read a whole lot more. So that would be my advice.
All right. Thank you.
I would add, start where you are at. So if you're not at Bavinck level, that's fine. Start where you're at. Begin with what you can handle. So if you can do a book, read an article. And with time, the discipline grows and your ability to retain stuff grows. An extra thing I would kind of add to balance it off is you also want to, as you read the dead and alive guys, you want to be relational, be with the people so that you do not become that theological guy who is speaking to people of his imagination. So you come away reading Chanok and you think you are in the 16th century. So as you read, relate with people so that you are getting that truth and applying it to people where they are at.
All right. Thank you, brothers.